What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with another episode of Under the Radar for you guys, talking about some albums that came out the week of July 8th. There were quite a few that came out this week that I had some eyes on, considering either the genre or the band, and what better band and album to kick off this week's episode of Under the Radar than with the biggest one out of them all, and that is Wormrot with their new album, Hiss. So this is the fourth studio album from this Singaporean grindcore band. I talked about their last album, Voices, that came out in 2016, and yeah, it'd been about 6.5 years since we've gotten a Wormrot release. We finally get a new one, so how does this one stack up? Well, if the last album, Voices, was a hell of an onslaught of music, and it's just bullet train aggression the whole way through, this album is very different from Voices. It still has that bullet train onslaught going for it. However, they diversified the sound a little bit here and there. You get some death metal chugging moments here and there on quite a few songs, some blackened parts in terms of like the really fast tremolo riffs that you get here and there, as well as some of the ambience. But you also, at times, get moments where they slow things down to a hardcore groove, or even into, for like maybe 5 seconds, a doom groove. But the big important thing, I think, that separates this album from everything that Wormrot has done, I would say there's a little more emphasis on atmosphere and soundscapes. Like, there are quite a few tracks on here where you get some, like, soundscapey atmosphere going for it, and like pretty much the average length of these songs are about 1.5 minutes, I think, is the average. There were a few songs that went over 2 minutes, including the final track, which was the longest of the album at about 4.5, and that song, I think, really kind of encompasses everything this album had to offer in terms of like dynamic shifts, tempo changes, atmosphere, all sorts of stuff. And then vocally, very wild shrills going on here, some brutal death growls you can hear, and even some experimentation was going on as well. On top of like the different style shifts, you get a little bit of experimentation. There was one track on here where you get like tribal beats, which was, I guess, was like an inspiration from like Singaporean folk music, perhaps. But overall, for a grindcore album, and keep in mind, I'm not the world's biggest grindcore fan. I do like grindcore, just not as much as black metal or death metal or doom metal or thrash when it comes down to extreme metal. But grindcore does have its place in my heart, and I will say, in terms of like straight up grindcore, this is a contender for the best album this year in terms of normal grind. I'm giving this a 9 out of 10. I actually think I prefer this one over Voices, and it's because of the experimentation, the different style shifts that you get here and there on quite a lot of these songs, and it's short, sweet, to the point, and it packs a punch, and it packs some mood and murk and filth to it. So yeah, 9 out of 10. Now on to the second album that came out the week of July 8th, and that is Seep with Hymns to the Gore. So this is a debut, actually. This is from a one-man death doom project from Maine, of stage name Vomitus, and this band had been around since 2019 and had an EP in 2020. This is their debut album, Hymns to the Gore. So when I saw them described as death doom, I'm like, this should be interesting. And with the title and everything, I was expecting some like autopsy worship going on here, and there were moments on this album that definitely reminded me of early Autopsy, but there's also a lot of moments that remind me of Incantation and some of the finished, like early finished Death Doom, like Unholy and Ripakolu, also some Cyanide, maybe even little moments of Asphyx whenever the tempos get a little bit faster at times. But I will say for sure, this is cavernous and disgusting as fuck. Like, holy shit, the guitar tone on this album is so claustrophobic. It's so filled with otherworldly grime to it. The drums, The drum sound kind of remind me of like a combination of the drum sound from Unholy's From the Shadows album and Decapitated's Winds of Creation. Like the snare is very, very similar to those two albums, at least to me, whenever it came down to like hearing it all sonically. But this album, despite it being a Death Doom album, this is only like a little over 28 minutes, and like most of these songs are like on average 3 minutes. There were some shorter songs, some longer tracks, but they were able to pack everything into a nice, disgusting package and it did not overstay its welcome. That was the big thing. Like, some Death Doom does have a bit of a tendency to overstay its welcome depending on the band and the album. Here, given the song lengths and how long the album went by, they were able to pack in some slow, dirty stuff and make it sound like, okay, it's not dragging at all. It feels like it all flows well together. So for those reasons, this was a really good debut. I give this one an 8.5 out of 10. There were a couple of moments on the album where I thought, okay, these riffs kind of sound similar to each other. But hey, it's a debut. I'll cut them some slack there, and who knows, if we get another album from this band, it'll probably blow this one out of the water. So, yeah, really, really solid debut right here. 8.5 out of 10 for Hymns to the Gore by Seep. And now on to the third album we're talking about this week, and that is Traitor with Exiled to the Surface. So this is, I think, the fourth studio album from this young and hungry German thrash metal band. Now, this is the first time I've ever heard of this band, and seeing that they were a German thrash band, I thought, this is going to be really good, regardless. So, as I listened to it, there is a lot of German thrash influence on here, but there's probably a tad bit more influence from the Bay Area thrash scene coming in on this album. Like, you get a lot of riffs that feel like Metallica, Exodus, Testament. Even little moments of Megadeth can be thrown in here, especially with some of the lead work. But you do get some German thrash in there as well, from like early Creator, Destruction, like the early 90s era Sodom, I kind of hear. And speaking of Sodom, Tom Angel Ripper from Sodom actually does a guest vocal appearance on the song Total Thrash. And it was a thrasher of a tune. And also what was unique with this album is the fact that they decided to do a cover of George Michael's Careless Whisper, or Wham's Careless Whisper, but you get what I mean. And they turned that song from an 80s pop tune to a thrash song, and it was like, wow. They were able to take that song and make it into something of their own, and even changing the lyrics up a little bit to kind of fit more in line with the lyrical approach that they were going for on here. But yeah, like, there are moments on here where it gets really groovy. Sometimes you get the classic D beat on here. But man, does this album thrash and thrash hard. Perhaps the only complaint I could find about this album, there were a couple songs I thought maybe were a little bit corny for me. But regardless, musically speaking, this is some really good, fine-tuned German thrash. I give this one an 8.5 out of 10. This is a really solid album. Man, this year, like I keep saying, this year with thrash, it's been a strong year for thrash. Mostly in the underground, of course, but it doesn't matter. Thrash is king this year so far, but of course that's just me. But 8.5 out of 10 for Traitor. And now we have reached the final album that came out on July 8th, and that is Atomic Symphony with Hybris. I think that's correct, Hybris. So this is the second studio full-length from this Swiss progressive metal band. Another band that I had never heard of until now, and this band formed all the way back in 2009. Didn't put out anything until 2015 with their debut Redemption, according to Metal Archives, and it'd been 7 years since that debut, and here we are with their sophomore effort. Now, here I was thinking, you know, I'm a big fan of prog, and seeing that this band has a female vocalist, some people would probably have rolled their eyes at it. It's like, it's gonna be corny stuff. Let me tell you people something right now. There ain't nothing corny about this album. This is some brilliant progressive metal. Now, of course, whenever I was trying to do the research for this band, the only band I saw get compared to Atomic Symphony is Symphony X, and here I am kind of scratching myself thinking, well, how? Because Symphony X is much more neoclassical inspired progressive metal, whereas here, this felt a little bit more kind of stripped down progressive metal. Honestly, I say the best band I could compare Atomic Symphony to is old school Opeth, minus the death growls. Like, this is all melodic singing. And speaking of the vocalist, Jasmine, mwah, mwah. Not only is she a beautiful, sexy lady, but damn, she belts it out on these vocals. She's got an awesome vocal style here that isn't poppy, it isn't too over the top, just right. I think she did a fantastic job on the vocals with this album. But going back to what I was talking about, how it might sound a bit like old school Opeth, the riffs. There are some heavy, monstrous riffs, some awesome grooves that remind me of old Opeth from, like, My Arms, Your Hearse through, say, Deliverance, like, in that time frame. Like, there was some really cool groove moments on here, awesome riffs. There are even moments where it kind of almost felt like Dream Theater at times, especially with the keyboards and the piano going to town. And there were times where you got some of that, like, bass style from Tool. A little bit. It's kind of peppered in there. Also worth noting that the producer of this album is the legendary Tommy T. Barron, the guitarist of Coroner, one of the best thrash bands, one of the most underrated thrash bands of all time, I'll say that. But yeah, this album, I was blown away, and it's only 6 tracks and it's like almost 43 minutes. There are 2 10-minute plus songs on here, and they're both masterworks of modern prog. And this, unlike a lot of other modern prog bands where they over-abuse the fucking H-string shit, they don't do any of that. They keep it pretty basic with the guitars. Or, well, not in terms of the riffing, but in terms of, like, keeping it, like, 6-string, maybe 7-string if they go down that route. But overall, this was a fantastic album. I give this a 9.5 out of 10. I was not expecting much going into this, but wow. Some masterful progressive metal. This almost kind of feels like what Opeth should be. Like, heavy prog metal. Don't need to do the death growls, necessarily. Just heavy balls-to-the-wall prog metal. And even though Opeth's slowly getting to that point now, I think this album could be like a good representation for where Opeth could go, because it just sounds so much like old school Opeth with the riffs and the rhythms, but Atomic Symphony do it in their own unique way, and nothing more, nothing less I can say. And that does it for this week's episode of Under the Radar. What was your favorite album out of the 4 that I talked about? Of course, I will have the albums linked in the description box below for you guys to check out. And until next time, horns high. See you guys soon. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing ShitTech's brand new Shit Can. This revolutionary on-the-go product will be the biggest savior of your life. Say you're at a hotel that doesn't have any toilets, or you're stranded out in the middle of nowhere as your car breaks down, you can take the ShitTech Shit Can with you if you need to take a dump, piss, or puke whenever you need to.
Yep, you can never go wrong with GIF media files.
You are aware it's pronounced GIF, right?
Oh no, silly, this is a GIF.
Damn it, we don't even have spam in here! Why?